There are moments in leadership when people begin asking when you are finally going to make the decision they have already made on your behalf. Elizabeth experienced that pressure almost from the day she became queen. Everyone wanted an answer. Parliament, her councillors, foreign ambassadors, noble families. Across England and throughout Europe, people who had never met Elizabeth Tudor spent countless hours discussing the future they believed she should choose. The question sounded simple. Who would the Queen marry? Yet, beneath those 5 words lay the future of a kingdom. Today, marriage is usually understood as a deeply personal decision. For Elizabeth, it could never be merely personal. Whoever became her husband would influence England's alliances, reshape the balance of power at court, affect the succession to the throne, and potentially alter the future of Europe itself. Long before Elizabeth made a single decision, everyone else had already begun imagining how they hoped she would decide.
Welcome to the Members in the Room podcast, where we share real-life stories about leadership and their underlying human behavior rooted in science and research. We unpack and interpret the evolutionary forces behind it to help you to better lead your people for outstanding business results.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Members in the Room, where we explore leadership lessons that stand the test of time, using history and neuroscience to explain the human behavior behind pivotal decisions, because those same patterns still shape how leaders and teams succeed or fail in organizations today. I'm Nicholas Bocconi, CEO of Mammoth Leadership Sciences. As Elizabeth's reign settled into its early rhythm, the question of marriage became impossible to escape. Members of Parliament urged her to marry while she was still young enough to produce an undisputed heir. Their concern was understandable. England had endured decades of uncertainty over the succession, and few people wished to relive the instability that had followed the deaths of Henry VIII, Edward VI, and Mary I. Her closest advisers largely agreed, although their motivations were not always identical. Some genuinely feared another constitutional crisis if the Queen died unexpectedly. Others saw an opportunity to strengthen England's position abroad by securing a powerful alliance. Beyond England's shores, European rulers viewed the young queen rather differently. To Philip II of Spain, to the French court, and to several princely houses across Europe, Elizabeth represented one of the most valuable political opportunities of that age. A successful marriage might achieve what armies often could not. Influence over England could be gained not through conquest, but through family. Closer to home, England's great noble families were hardly disinterested observers either. A husband chosen from among their own ranks would inevitably elevate one household above the others, bringing prestige, influence, and access to the Queen that no rival family could easily match. Everyone saw possibility. Everyone saw advantage. Everyone believed they understood what England needed. Only one person had to live with whichever future emerged. That was Elizabeth. Seen from her perspective, every proposal closed one set of doors while opening another. A Spanish marriage strengthened one relationship but alarmed Protestant England. A French alliance reassured some while unsettling others. Choosing an English nobleman risked upsetting the fragile balance she had worked so carefully to establish among the competing factions at court. There was no obvious solution because every solution created a different problem. The most difficult leadership decisions often share that characteristic. The alternatives are not divided neatly into right and wrong. They are divided into competing futures, each bringing opportunities, costs, and unintended consequences that cannot be fully understood beforehand. Among all the names attached to Elizabeth over the years, one stood apart: Robert Dudley. Unlike many of the foreign princes presented through diplomatic negotiations, Dudley was someone Elizabeth knew extraordinarily well. Their lives had intersected since childhood, and both had experienced the uncertainty and danger of the Tudor court from an early age. During Mary's reign, they had each spent time imprisoned in the Tower of London, accused of involvement in the failed Wyatt rebellion. Shared adversity often creates unusually strong bonds, and by the time Elizabeth became queen, Dudley had become one of the people she trusted most. There was, however, one obvious obstacle. He was already married. His wife, Amy Robsart, lived quietly away from court while Dudley spent increasing amounts of time in Elizabeth's company. That alone generated endless gossip. Observers wondered whether the Queen's affection might eventually overcome the legal and moral barriers that stood in the way. Then, in September 1560, everything changed. Amy Robsart was found dead at the foot of a staircase in the house where she had been staying. The official investigation concluded that her death had been accidental, and historians still debate precisely what happened. Yet, public opinion rarely waits for certainty. Rumors spread across England with astonishing speed, suggesting that Dudley, or even Elizabeth herself, had somehow benefited from Amy's death. Whether those suspicions were fair mattered less than the fact that they existed. A marriage that had already been politically difficult now became almost impossible. For Elizabeth, the loss extended beyond a failed marriage proposal. She had lost the possibility of choosing the one man many believed she genuinely cared for without placing the legitimacy of her reign in jeopardy. It is tempting to imagine that the obvious response would have been to move quickly towards another candidate. Instead, Elizabeth did something that puzzled almost everyone around her. She waited. Negotiations continued with one prince after another. Ambassadors traveled back and forth across Europe, carrying proposals, promises, and carefully worded letters. For a while, each new suitor appeared to be the favorite. Then momentum faded, another possibility emerged, and the process began again. To many contemporaries, it looked like indecision. With time, historians have increasingly recognized something else, though. Elizabeth had discovered that uncertainty could itself become a source of influence. As long as a marriage remained possible, foreign rulers continued negotiating. Alliances remained flexible. England retained room to maneuver diplomatically because no one could yet be certain which direction the Queen might ultimately choose. She was not simply postponing a decision. No, she was preserving options. That distinction reaches beyond Tudor England. Human beings are naturally uncomfortable with uncertainty. Our brains prefer clear answers because certainty reduces anxiety and allows us to predict what comes next. Faced with ambiguity, we often feel pressure to decide simply to remove the discomfort of not knowing. Elizabeth resisted that impulse with remarkable consistency. Her own life had taught her that the first answer is not always the wisest one. Sometimes the moment you commit, possibilities disappear forever. Waiting did not make life easier. Every delay invited criticism. Parliament grew impatient. Ambassadors became frustrated. Advisors urged action with increasing urgency, convinced that the risks of postponement were becoming greater than the risks of choosing. Elizabeth listened. She rarely rushed. That required a different kind of discipline from the one people usually associate with decisive leadership. It is relatively easy to make a decision simply because everyone expects one. It is considerably harder to resist the emotional pressure created by other people's certainty, especially when those people genuinely believe they are acting in your best interests. Perhaps that is why this chapter of Elizabeth's life still feels surprisingly familiar. Most of us have experienced moments when other people become deeply invested in choices that only we can ultimately make. Their advice may be sincere, their concerns may be valid, their hopes may even be generous, yet they are not the ones who must live inside their consequences. Elizabeth understood that better than anyone. Over time, she transformed what many regarded as a weakness into one of the defining characteristics of her reign. She became the Virgin Queen, presenting herself as symbolically married to England itself. Whether that identity emerged from conviction, political necessity, or a combination of both, it gave her something no husband ever could: complete independence. Before we close, here are 2 leadership takeaways from today's episode. First, uncertainty is not always a weakness to eliminate. Sometimes it is a strategic resource. Leaders who rush to provide certainty may unintentionally surrender valuable options, whereas thoughtful patience can preserve flexibility until better information becomes available. Second, the strongest leaders distinguish between external pressure and internal readiness. Organizations, teams, and stakeholders often demand immediate decisions because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Elizabeth demonstrated that responding to pressure and responding wisely are not always the same thing. The discipline to wait, when waiting genuinely creates better choices, can become a competitive advantage. Elizabeth had shown that legitimacy could be earned and that a divided nation could be held together without choosing extremes. Now she had revealed something equally remarkable. Sometimes the greatest source of power lies not in making the decision, but in refusing to let others decide your timing. Or as one of my past mentors once put it when I was a young sales manager, he told me, "Here the decision is to not make a decision." Brilliant. In the next chapter of her story, however, uncertainty would take a different form, as another woman emerged, whose very existence challenged Elizabeth's right to rule. All right, this was it again for today. If this episode resonated with you, whether as a leader, a student of history, or someone curious about why power unfolds the way it does, please subscribe, rate, and share it with someone in your network who would appreciate this kind of perspective. And lastly, if you're interested in more, you can order my book. It has the same title as this podcast, The Mammoth in the Room. It offers a practical roadmap for how great leaders and their teams embrace evolutionary truths for outstanding business results. And it does that in 3 sections: on people, on strategy, and on implementation. Until next time, lead wisely, think critically, and don't let ancient instincts quietly hijack your modern leadership. I'm Nicholas Bocconi, and this is The Mammoth in the Room.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you on the next episode of The Mammoth in the Room.